The broken year, a time of malady across the Concord and increased predations by foes, was brought to its zenith under the cruel summer sun in the east. Across the scrubby Lancaster hills, under the eaves of the Wolfton Woods, and in the outer homesteads of Carringsfield, the future of Bordevar and the Concord was placed into the forge, tested against the blades, magic, and foul temperament of the onyx aristocracy. The Concord was not found wanting. Over the year, the Concordian heroes took to the field of battle 8 times through the magic of the realm weave and the waystones. Through victory and defeat, they brought the fight to the undead, repulsing forces of the Marble Gauntlet on the field, clashing with raiding ghouls and the submersive necromancers. Heroes gave their lives through winter and summer, but their loss is not in vain. The Concord has stood firm in Weiland, and the battles therein have been won. The host of Radomir of the Vale, would-be Chancellor of the Southern Reach, have been repulsed, and the armies of the Onyx are wounded. But all things are not without cost. Consume the harshest truth, the battle in Everguarde. From Lake Ledur to the Lancaster Hills sits Duchy Everguarde, a place of industry, of comfortable bucolic climes, and a quiet, dignified life on the shores of Lake Ledur. All of this was built around the township of Carringsfield and the great works of the Lake Ledur quarry, responsible for the Concord's supply of arkstone. These idyllic vistas were disrupted by the emergence of a most cancerous force from beneath the eaves of the plagued barony of Vassatal, a horde of risen Bordevarians and Zekatal, empowered by arcane necromancers and infused with the strange alchemy of the wrath of Port Gargant. These creatures carried the plague of Brastrite and swarmed southwards, attempting to gorge themselves on the people of Carringsfield, to force the Concordians' beating hearts into their ravenous wars. Half-dead huntsmen sniped at important figures of the Concord, their pestilent arrows promising death for those who would suffer their bite. Among them, impossible to restrain and ever-present, was the plague baron of Vassatal, the wrath of Port Gargant, and the master of the first seal, Danica Remortis, a creature of smoke and beaten hatred. Opposing Remortis was a single Concordian army. The Legion of the Black Heart Bear marched down the Crusaders' Road and took up positions all across the Everguarde, with Greenwilder soldiers holding Richton's tier alongside Carringsfield militia in the west. Ritters commanded the defence of the near-completed Keep of the Horned Count and Peregrine's Roost in the east, while the vast bulk of the force emplaced in Carringsfield under the command of one of the Weald's most well-known heroes, Ritter Valric Fanshawe, twice champions the Weald, and monster slayer to rival any living hounds priest. Still, the war against the Wrath was a chaotic one. The vast horde of Remortis had little command or control. Rather it surged against the barriers of the Legion and the people of Everguarde, a pestilent wave that knew no mercy. But the Legion was well supported. Supplies from the Passage Field Hospital were brought to the army's crow doctors, who treated the Blasterstrite and other illnesses of war with cold calculation. At 2 points during the conflict, the Blood Plague threatened to sweep through the army, and at one point even took a tentative hold of Carringsfield. But each time it was treated and quarantined through the skilled action of the crow doctors, supplies from the field hospital, and the careful intervention of the Everguarde Medical Council. The conflict in the north came to a head during the Battle of Gulliver's Mill. A tall brick and timber structure that overlooks Carringsfield Township from a hill in the northeast, Gulliver's Mill was a natural place to anchor the Legion's defence. In the eve of dusk on the 25th of January, the Wrath attacked en masse, beginning with the creature itself appearing within the headquarters in the mill's barn, hoping to bring its scythe through the form of General Fanshawe. When it did so, it arrived in an empty room, for the general was elsewhere, having been called back to the Weald to aid the champion of the spheres, Sir Escanor Lionheart of House Avalon. Regardless, the Wraith slew those it found, and a horde of undead greater than had been seen in Everguarde surged towards the positions of the Legion, who readied their great blades and steeled themselves against the assault. The Legion was alone on the northern front. The wielder's knowledge of the woods was hoped to be enough to hold the undead at bay here, while most of the Concord's forces were clashing with others in the south. As every soldier was pushed to the front, the line threatened to break and release hundreds of slathering ghouls into Carringsfield proper. Atop the hill of Gulliver's Mill, Ritter captains of the Legion battled the Wraith and its prowling plague huntsmen, giving their lives to secure the key defensive position. When all seemed lost, mere moments before the retreat could be called, the air grew thick with arcane energy. Mages of the Legion and local healers buckled over in pain as the ley line surged, augmented by a distant power of the Shard Circle and guided by the Realm Weave. As the bulk of the forces of the Wrath made a final push, the ground was torn asunder. A chasm more than 2,000 paces long split the fields, roads, and gullies north of Carringsfield apart, swallowing the ghouls, risen, and the worst of Remortis's army. The chasm roared with the splitting of stone and the shattering of bodies as earth, stone, and root were split. The ground wound grew, widening and exploding with magical power. In a cacophony of light and arcane fury, colossal teeth of crystal shattered from the sides of the now mighty chasm. Some as large as a wagon knocked aside and crushed the falling undead, while smaller spears of glowing quartz impaled the Concord's forces. Hundreds of the horde fell into the Crystal Maw, an arcane projection of untold power, forced into the world by the Shard Circle's combined magics. With one final shudder, the western edge of the moor split the banks of Lake Ladua, causing a torrent of water to flood downwards into the glowing depths that had consumed the cannibals of the Onyx aristocracy. The Crystal Maw broke the back of the Wrath's assault, and the Legion rallied about it. When their general returned, he was not alone. 500 Laronamerian bravos, revolutionaries, and militia followed him down the Crusaders' Road to enforce the beleaguered northern front, holding the flapping banner of Madre Campo and the villa estate of a darkly dressed woman with a wide veiled hat. Over the remaining months, the Legion pushed the remnant forces of Remortis's horde back to the eaves of Vassatile. The heavy blades of the Green Wielders had held firm, augmented by the might of the Shard Circle and reinforced by unexpected allies. In doing so, the Legion had repaid a debt from a year prior when unsupported Bordovarians had secured the defence of the Resinderholtz township of Eisen. As the bone-tired warriors of the Legion prepared to depart, the people of Carringsfield came out to greet them like the people of Eisen had done, and they presented their defenders with woven wreaths, but this time of lake reeds rather than willow. And where the Dow people of Eisen had sent off their Bordovarian protectors with solemn prayer and thanks, the people of Carringsfield did it in the traditional Bordovarian manner of beer and banners. The battle in the north was won, but the damage was impossible to ignore. The Great Crystal Maw, a wound in the earth more than 2,000 paces long and 100 paces wide, lies to the north of Carringsfield. Its razor-sharp crystalline teeth glitter and glow a rainbow of colours beneath the cold water that has flooded it. Deep within the chasm, the corpses of the horde remain, and we can only hope that they remain unmoving. Game information. There will be decisions and information in regards to the battle in the north and the Crystal Maw for the Senator of Weiland, the Ducal Council, the Champion of the King, the Archmage of the Shard Circle, and the Groundskeeper of Richton's Tier. The fighting in the north is heavy and filled with the constant risk of the Blasestrite and the Wraith. Characters who want to roleplay having been part of the fighting in the north can tell stories of hordes of plagued Risen, night assaults by particularly feral ghouls, and the cold gaze at the Crow Doctor's masks. Everguarde Duchy lacks a duke at present, as the Wise Council has not yet released the title back to the nobility of Bordovar. This is unlikely to happen this year, as the Duchy of Starscar was only released last year. The only thing that would increase the likelihood of this is a great increase in the number of Bordovarian heroes present at Summit. Because Everguarde lacks a duke, many of its concerns will be given to the Senator of Weiland and the Ducal Council, while opportunities will likely go by the wayside. The defence of the Everguarde duchy is complete, but significant damage has been done, particularly to the fields of the northern parts of the region. Any herb gardens, farms, or wildernesses in Everguarde will find that they have produced as if they were only one tier lower this past season, or half if they are a tier 1. Alright, who's not dead? Sound off! The battle in the south. While not part of the line of keeps that form the barrier of Weiland, the abode of the Duke of Skarsgård very nearly could have been. A squat and fortified structure, the armoury stands as a redoubt for the people of Arbington and as a supply of arms and armour. But over the summer, the armoury became the home of many more, the command staff of 2 armies and the temporary home of mercenary commanders, messengers and criminals, all housed by the good graces of Duke Sigismund and his staff. This southern front was a dangerous one. Radomir the Vale, would-be Chancellor of the Southern Reach, had brought a fresh army of the aristocracy to the fore, along with the strange reinforcement enticed from the distant north, undead warriors of the Old Guard, clad in plate armour, wielding glaives and hammers, wailing skeletons that bleed clotted blood from behind massive shields, and heavy-set carcasses of oxen that contain an undead flame within them. The army of Radomir was not an army of Bordevar risen to fight their country folk, but of the Onyx aristocracy. Standing against them were some of the Concord's finest, the Iron Brawlers, the kingdom's common-born sons and daughters, bring to bear bills, bows and brute strength. The townships of Arbington, Weiland and Carringsfield were their homes, and if not the homes of their families, at least the homes of their favourite pubs. The Brawlers knew that there was no retreat. The blood would water the fields and make the barley grow. At their head was the armoured form of Brigadier Gallard Grey, a minor celebrity in his own right, well known for his constantly stressed demeanour and his reputation for courage and a fair heart. The soon-to-be father had every reason to get his people home and ensure there was a home to go to. Amidst the Iron Brawlers there were odd comrades, criminals of Skarsgård given the option to fight until they die or the Concord still stands, rather than other punishment. While none were pressed into service, the option for other punishment is always present. These were a desperate lot, giving the Iron Brawlers an extra ed to its ironclad strength. Offsetting the intense Brigadier was the effervescent Aramir el Obregon and the Andashi Desert Whisperers. The mustachioed commander led an army with easy confidence, born of many years as a master janissary, bargaining with life and coin for glory. The Desert Whisperers complemented the Iron Brawlers, granting them heavy skirmishers in the form of Andashi janissaries, and adding nomad scouts to the groups of Bordavarian rangers. Together the generals made quite the odd couple, while their armies were forged into a keen blade. More so than any other front, the battle in the south was one of manoeuvre. Radomir and his officers were students of war, and the battlefield presents numerous opportunities to achieve victory through skilled use of terrain and the application of force. The scrubby Lenscaster Hills, the flatlands on the far side, and the dense Wolfton Woods each provide their own challenges. Despite the monstrous form of the army arrayed, the forces of the aristocracy moved like a mundane one, deploying in good order and attempting to lure the Concord into a pitched battlefield. After months of manoeuvre, skirmish and retreat, the 2 circling duelists of Concord and Onyx finally did battle in the northern reaches of the duchy. Striking far from the headquarters of opposition at Volderen Armoury, the figure only known as the General led the bulk of the army across the Lenscaster Hills, unopposed and prepared to sweep west into Weiland proper before both Concordian armies could be arrayed against them. Early in the morning on the 2nd of January, as the enemy was already well within Concordian territory, the forces of the Iron Brawlers and the Desert Whisperers were forced to push back against this hostile vanguard, rather than act in the defensive manner that favoured them. The Iron Brawlers attempted to pin the enemy in place, whilst the Andashi swept east through the Lenscaster Hills to isolate the undead from the retreat. The battle raged throughout the day and into the dark of the next morning. The General herself clashed with the Brigadier, but neither was able to score a killing blow against the other, although the Brigadier still carried a wound with him months later. The billmongers of the Brawlers looked on into the battle with haunted eyes, nearly 20 hours fighting against a foe that does not retreat, that feels no pain, and carries alien sigils. In the darkness of that late night, the sons and daughters of Bordevar were brought face to face with death, ironclad in dark iron. But they did not break, they did not even blink. The victory for the battle comes in the form of Andashi blades. The eastward sweep of General Aramir and his troops forced the general to retreat slowly, and the last hours of the battle were fittingly fought among the stand, the vast semi-permanent encampment that acted as the main point of rest for the soldiers fighting on the front for the past 5 years. The Onyx army retreated through the camp, sowing chaos as they laid into non-combatants and burnt the structures to disrupt those that would follow them. Those Andashi of the Desert Whisperers walked for leagues through the harsh scrub of the Lanscaster Hills during the day and were expected to fight like demons afterwards. But they still did their duty. They were the blades of the wind in the night. Following the Battle of the Vanguard, the campaign in the south largely ended. Brigadier Gallard handed over command to General Aramir when he was called away to Rezinderholz in the campaign returned to the complex manoeuvre and skirmish. The forces of the Desert Whisperers would once again clash with the army of Radomir and his general in the Battle of Blackvale, where Andashi scouts drew a large formation of the Onyx into a battle under the eaves of the Wolfton Woods. Whilst not as decisive of a victory as the Battle of the Vanguard, it signalled an end to the campaign in the south. After one final night at the hospitality of Duke Sigismund, the forces of the Desert Whisperers and many Concordian mercenaries began the long march home, firm in the knowledge they had fought well. Game information. There will be decisions and information regarding the campaign in the south for the Champion of the King, the Duke of Starsgar, the Sheriff of Arbington, the Brigadier of the Iron Brawlers, and the General of the Desert Whisperers. Characters who want to roleplay as having been part of the Southern Campaign can tell tales full of plenty of marching, a lot of standing, and the horrifying combat that was the Battle of the Vanguard. They can tell tales of Andashi and Bordavarian troops working in synergy and dangerous patrols against a foreign enemy. The position of the Volderen Armoury made it a natural meeting point for many of the Concordian characters present during the campaign, and while the martial surroundings of the armoury make it not the most comfortable location, the Duke's staff put out a decent feast and ensured that the commanders and captains of the conflict had a place to rest. Flanked by war on both sides, the core of the battle in Weiland could be found north of the stand. It was here that the heavy metal of plate armour would clash as the hammer blow of Sir Thordis Revet and the marble gauntlet would attempt to turn aside the Concord's final defenders, the Valley Zone and the first banner of Bordevar. Thordis Revet, once of House Avalon, led an army of undead knights against the erstwhile brother Sir Louis Soir of House Avalon. But if there was once love between the companions, it appeared that it had not survived the grave, as the predations of the marble gauntlet bore an edge previously dulled with age. Something had changed within this order of knights that were once Bordavarian. Gone was the strange maniacal pageantry, gone were the oldest heraldic signs, and gone was any type of hope of peaceful resolution. In their place was deadly determination to cast aside the Concord, march to the manor and retrieve their ultimate prize, the body of King Artorius Bordevar. The forces of the Marble Gauntlet attempted to break into Weiland in skilled but small cohorts. Dozens of forces, some barely 50 soldiers, whilst others hundreds strong, probed the Lanscaster Hills. If just one force had made their way through, they could have carved a bloody wound across Weiland, one that left the stuttering kingdom dying upon the fields it had been reduced to. But Bordevar came to the Concord in search of allies, in search of other nations with valour in their hearts and virtue in their souls. Bordavarian knights, clad in full harness, their shields blessed by the priests and blades grasped with bloodied hands, were joined by furious Huskarls in their banner cloaks, high mountain mercenaries and arcane farseers. What was unthinkable 50 years ago transpired as the Valley Zone stood and died side by side with the heroes of the Kingless Kingdom. At their head was Godric Eriksson, a cunning mage and priest who stood in the bloodied shoes of those the valley had already lost. Together, the twin Concordian mage generals knew that they must be the iron and steel that would not shatter. Every battle against the Marble Gauntlet was life or death. There was no manoeuvre like in the south, nor thoughtless hordes like in the north. Every band of interlopers was fervent, skilled, and furious at the very existence of Bordevar. The battles were many, too many to count, carrying names such as the Sacrifice of Sir Delmere, the Steel Grey Knight, and the Osrin of Brackenlow Cannot Die. The forces of the Concord were divided across the region, fanning out in bands, chasing the forces of the Marble Gauntlet down, each time clashing with them in the Lanscaster Hills, a scrubby badland, home to little but goats and weeds. But over time, the conflict became untenable. The Concord could not be everywhere at once, and the simple nature of reaction always had them on the back foot. Sooner or later they would misstep, and be too slow in rallying a response. As Sir Louisoix and Godric feared that they were doomed to fail in their task, the solution came from the Duke of Starsgar bearing the writ of the Ducal Council. The inferno that followed lit the night sky of Weiland from Vassartal to Arvington, for eves without end. King's Rangers burnt the Lanscaster Hills in a planned conflagration to rival the flaming revolutions of Lorona Mare. The Duke of Starsgar burned a full 3/4 of his duchy to the ground, a hungry blaze that swept out across the hills, consuming scrub forests, goat herds, and anyone who refused to evacuate. The flames forced out hiding ghoul scouts like a hound flushes a fox. That web of undead rangers that had been guiding the Marble Gauntlet's bull-headed graven knights was slain at the hands of the righteous burning, the arrows of the King's Rangers, and the hatchets of summiters. In the ashes that followed, all was still. Weiland is not like the scrublands of Mukarem to the west. It is a careful ecosystem, brimming with life and old roots. The flames that swept across Lanscaster will leave scars in the soil for decades to come, and perhaps consign the economy of Starsgar to the grave alongside the Marble Gauntlet it burnt. What followed was a furious and single-minded attack on the headquarters of the Concord by the Marble Gauntlet. Sir Thordis Revet, flanked by knights clad in red and white of the Traitor House, carved a path towards the command tents of both the First Banner and the Valley Zone. Members of the First Banner dropped to their knees before the twin warriors of the Miracle, and were slain while they prayed. Valley folk warrior reeves wept as their burrows were split asunder by the steel of the Knight of Carnage, Thordis Revet. But if the war in the east is anything, it is a tale of strange unity. The final lines of the First Banner and the Valley Zone were not just the troops that Revet had been slaying this past season. They were green-wheeled Ritter mercenaries drawn from Resinderholz, and dashy janissaries drawn by the promise of coin, and the order of the hallowed word, those knights of the manor who had dedicated their lives to protecting a man long since dead. As the two mage generals of the Concord fought back against the coming defeat, the same defeat found the tide turning against it. Their unholy effort expended, their forces burnt, the Marble Gauntlet was forced into retreat, back into Royal Bordevar. The Battle of Weiland was over, a victory not won by the king, nor the scattered allies, and not by chance. This was a victory earned by the blood of the comrades, the blood of unity, and the blood of the Concord. Game information. There will be information and decisions to be made about the battle in the east for the Champion of the King, the General of the Valley Zone, the Banneret of the First Banner, the Duke of Starsgar, the Sheriff of Arvington, and the Ducal Council. The battle in the east is a heroic one. The combat is duels against the mighty warriors of the Marble Gauntlet and their cunning supporters. It is a campaign marked with great sacrifice, and any character who wants to roleplay as having been part of it can personify this by telling the tale of someone else's fatal but necessary survival. Thordis Revet remains the commander of a changed Marble Gauntlet that appears to have regained its teeth. Flanked by what appears to be the traitors of House Avalon, he remains one of the most dangerous single figures in the East, but perhaps the political power of Radomir the Vale is of greater risk. The Onyx aristocracy is not beaten, not by far. The massive damage to the Duchy Starsgar by the burning of the Lanscaster Hills cannot be overstated. The damage done to save the campaign will be felt for some time. All investments in Duchy Starsgar will find that they are produced as if they were one tier lower, or half their tier 1, until the damage is repaired. With the first rains beginning to break in Weiland, people return to some semblance of normalcy. The new line of keeps that dot the charred Lancaster Hills stand as guardians against the continued attacks by the Onyx aristocracy that will surely appear in time. But the people of Bordevar know that the Concord will stand by its word and will come to their defence if required. For the once xenophobic and crusading Bordevarians, it is a truly changing moment. For the first time, Concordian symbols appear, however infrequently, across Weiland. There will be a lot of rebuilding required for Weiland, between the Crystal Moor, the burning of the Lancaster Hills, and the devastation that the broken year has dealt. The people are hurting. It is likely that this next year will be one where Bordevar struggles for funds and deals with the fallout from this conflict. But the fact that their hearts still beat to struggle is a gift all on its own. Can't kill hope, can't grow fear. Game information. The Battle of Weiland this past season has been the biggest in Concordian history, with operations in support of it taking place all over the year. 5 Concordian armies fielded against the enemy force more than 40,000 strong. Through sacrifices from as far as Mukurem and the loss of heroes and great monetary cost, the Concord was able to see victory, buying enough time for a new line of forts to be built between Weiland and Royal Bordevar. But the battle was not a foregone conclusion, and had the Concord made even 3 different choices or failed a single conflux, we might be looking at a very different map. This is a victory that all heroes of the Concord can feel is well earned. And that concludes the entry Wrath of the Concord, the Battle of Weiland. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.